Just the immediate family, my sister said, and I thought, wait, wasn't I family? I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there in the kitchen of the house I'd been helping pay for, holding my phone, reading her text for the third time like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. Let me back up. Because this story doesn't start with a party. It starts about 6 years ago, when I was 24, fresh out of college with a degree in accounting and a job at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte that paid me just enough to feel like a real adult. I was proud of myself. I'd worked hard. I had a 401k before most of my friends even knew what one was. I had a little apartment, a used Civic that I'd paid off early, and a habit of checking my bank balance every morning just because I liked seeing the number go up. My family didn't have that kind of relationship with money. My parents had always lived close to the edge, not destitute, but never comfortable. My dad worked in HVAC, and my mom did bookkeeping part-time for a dentist's office. My sister was 4 years older than me, married young to a guy named, well, I'll just call him my brother-in-law, who had opinions about everything and income from nothing reliable. They had 2 kids before they'd figured out how to cover their own rent consistently. I was the youngest. I was the one who'd made it. And somewhere along the way, that stopped being something they were proud of and started being something they expected to benefit from. It was small at first. My mom called one October asking if I could cover her car insurance that month because they'd had an unexpected plumbing expense. Of course, $140, no big deal. Then my sister's transmission went out and she needed $800 or she couldn't get to work. I put it on my credit card and she said she'd pay me back by the end of the month. She didn't. I didn't say anything because it felt petty. Then my dad's hours got cut and they needed help with the mortgage for a few months, just until things stabilized. Things didn't stabilize. Things didn't stabilize. I want to be clear about something. I didn't mind helping at first. I genuinely didn't. These were people I loved, and I had more than they did, and sharing felt right. What I didn't realize was that helping, when it goes unacknowledged long enough, stops feeling like generosity and starts feeling like obligation. And once it's obligation, you're no longer a daughter or a sister. You're a resource. By the time I was 28, I was contributing about $1,500 a month across various family needs, my parents' mortgage shortfalls, my sister's groceries when things got tight, my brother-in-law's business idea that needed startup costs and then quietly disappeared from conversation, a medical bill here, a utility shut-off notice there. I kept a spreadsheet. Yes, I'm an accountant. Of course I kept a spreadsheet. And when I added it up one night after a glass of wine, I realized I had given my family just over $40,000 in 4 years. Not lent. Given. Because the repayment conversations always went nowhere and I'd stopped having them because they made everyone uncomfortable. Meanwhile, I'd put off taking any real vacation. I drove the same Civic. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment by myself because I liked space, but I'd been quietly calculating whether I could afford a mortgage, and the answer was getting murkier every year. I wasn't struggling. But I wasn't building the way I should have been. The thing nobody talks about in these situations is how gradually invisible you become. Every holiday I showed up. Every birthday I brought something. Every family photo I was there. But the conversations at the dinner table somehow always circled back to my brother-in-law's fantasy about flipping houses, or my sister's opinion about the neighbors, or my parents' plans for a trip they were hoping to take someday. I was background noise. I was the one who kept the lights on, and they'd all gotten so used to the lights being on that they'd forgotten there was a switch. It came to a head in February of this year. My parents were turning 30 years of marriage in April. 30 years is a milestone, I get that. My sister called me to discuss the celebration, and I remember thinking, okay, this is actually sweet, we're doing something together as a family. She had a vision, a private room at Oleander's, a nice restaurant downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and a prix-fixe menu, plus floral arrangements, a photo slideshow, a professional photographer for 2 hours, and a custom anniversary cake from a local bakery. She'd already priced it out. She sent me the spreadsheet. Yes. She sent me a spreadsheet. And her estimated total was $3,400. I figure we split it, she said. Split it how? I asked. Well, she said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. I've got some things going on right now. So maybe 70-30? You cover the bigger portion and I'll handle the rest. 70-30. So roughly $2,380 from me and 1,020 from her for a party for our parents' anniversary. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. And then I said yes. Because I always said yes, and because I genuinely wanted my parents to have something nice. I paid the deposits. I followed up with the vendors. I designed the photo slideshow. 47 slides. I spent a Sunday afternoon going through old albums and scanning photos on my phone. I coordinated with the bakery about the flavor and the wording on the cake. I ordered the floral centerpieces online and had them shipped to my sister's house since she lived closer to the venue. My sister's contribution in this process was mostly sending me feedback on my choices. The flowers were a little plain. The bakery font looked kind of generic. Maybe we should add a string quartet? I priced it out. We did not add a string quartet. The party was set for Saturday, April 12th. On March 28th, 2 weeks before the party, my sister called me. I remember I was making dinner, stirring pasta, and I almost didn't pick up because I was tired and I had an early morning. I picked up anyway. So, listen, she said, and there was something in her voice I didn't quite catch at first. Rehearsed maybe. We've been talking, and we think it might be best to keep the party a little more intimate. Just close family. I turned the burner down. What do you mean? Like just the immediate family. Mom, Dad, me and the kids, and his parents are flying in from Tucson, so they'll be there. We want it to feel personal, you know? I stood there. My pasta was overcooking. I could feel something slow and cold moving through me. I'm not invited to my parents' anniversary party, I said. It wasn't a question. I was trying to hear how it sounded out loud. It's not like that, she said quickly. Your family, obviously. But it's just with his parents coming and it's already getting complicated, and we think smaller is better. You understand, right? I understood exactly. What she was actually saying was, we've already taken your money and your labor and your Sunday afternoon scanning old family photos, and now we'd like to enjoy the party without you. His parents count as close family. You do not. I didn't yell. I didn't cry on the phone. I said, okay, in a voice I didn't recognize, and I hung up. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor, my pasta boiling over on the stove, the smoke detector about 30 seconds from going off, and I just breathed. Here's the part I've never told anyone before. I didn't feel hurt right away. I felt something more like clarity. Like when you're looking at one of those optical illusions and then suddenly you see the other image and you can never unsee it. The whole shape of the last 6 years rearranged itself in about 4 minutes. Every time I'd said yes, every transfer and every deposit, and every time I'd declined a trip with friends because I needed to cover something for my family. The spreadsheet. $40,000. And I wasn't family enough to sit at the table. I got up, turned off the stove, and opened my laptop. I'd had travel alerts set up for months, a reflex from a work conference I'd half planned to attend in Portland that fell through. One of the alerts was for flights to Japan. I'd mentioned to a coworker back in January that I'd always wanted to see the cherry blossoms in Kyoto, and she'd said, you should just go. And I'd laughed because I always had reasons not to. The alert showed a round trip from Charlotte to Osaka through Chicago for $740. That was economy. There was also a premium economy option, with one of the international carriers that had fully reclining seats and a meal service, and it was $1,300 all in, $1,300 all in. I booked the premium economy. I'd been paying $2,390 for a party I wasn't invited to. I could spend $1,300 on myself. I also found a small traditional inn, a ryokan, in Kyoto that had an opening for 6 nights during peak cherry blossom season. I booked it. I put down deposits on a day trip to Nara, a pottery class in the Higashiyama district, and a private tea ceremony that a travel blogger I followed had recommended. All of it together came to less than half of what I'd committed to the anniversary party. And then I did something that felt very strange and very necessary. I went to bed and I slept better than I had in months. I didn't cancel anything with the vendors. I didn't call my sister back. I just quietly removed myself from the planning thread and let her figure out what I'd already handled. I told no one where I was going. My coworker, the one who'd said you should just go, knew because I'd mentioned it casually in the break room that week. My closest friend from college knew because she texted me about weekend plans and I said I was going to be out of the country. That was it. April 12th, I was on a flight over the Pacific. I don't have great words for what Kyoto looked like during cherry blossom season. I've tried to describe it to people since, and I always feel like I'm failing. The trees along the philosopher's path were in full bloom, and the petals were doing this thing in the late afternoon light, where they caught the sun and looked almost incandescent. I had a good camera on my phone, and I'd also borrowed a compact mirrorless camera from a friend. I walked slowly. I stopped a lot. I ate ramen at a tiny counter restaurant where I was the only non-Japanese person and had to order by pointing at a vending machine that dispensed meal tickets, and it was the best thing I'd eaten in years. On the second day, I visited the Fushimi Inari Shrine, the one with thousands of orange torii gates winding up the mountain, and I hiked the full trail to the top, something most tourists don't do. It took about 2 hours. Near the summit, I sat on a stone bench and looked out over the city below and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like myself. That evening, back at the ryokan, I edited some of the photos from the day. My room had a small window that overlooked a mossy garden, and the lighting was soft and amber. I posted 4 photos to my Instagram: the shrine path, a close-up of cherry blossoms over water, the view from the mountain, and one of me at the pottery class with a slightly lopsided bowl I'd made that I was unironically proud of. The caption was simple: found my table. I didn't tag my location. I didn't mention anyone. I went to sleep. What happened next I found out in pieces. My coworker texted me first. She said she'd seen my post and loved it, and then she said, "Wait, isn't today your parents' party?" And I said yes. And she said, "Girl." Then, 3 days later, I got a voicemail from my mom. She was crying. She said the party had been a disaster and that people had seen my photos and started asking questions, and could I please call her back. Then my sister texted, "We need to talk." Then my brother-in-law posted something on Facebook. His account is public, I found out later, calling me selfish and attention-seeking for posting vacation photos on our parents' anniversary. Someone he worked with saw the post and mentioned it to a mutual connection who happened to know someone at his company, and it caused, to put it diplomatically, a professional conversation about his social media conduct that he was apparently not prepared to have. I called my mom after a few days. Not immediately, because I needed to be standing on solid ground before I had that conversation. And solid ground takes time. "Why did you post those pictures?" she said. Not hello. Not how are you. "Why did you post those pictures?" "Because I was in Japan and they were beautiful," I said. "Is there a reason I shouldn't have shared my vacation?" There was a long pause. Then she said she wished I had come to the party. "I wasn't invited," I said. Gently. Clearly. Another pause. "Your sister said you couldn't make it." And there it was. I took a breath. "Mom, I was told 2 weeks before the party that it was just immediate family." Those are her exact words. I was not invited. I paid for most of it. And I was not invited. The silence on the phone was a different kind than before. I didn't yell. I didn't recite the spreadsheet line by line, though I thought about it. I just said, quietly, "I think we need to have a bigger conversation about what's been happening between us for the last few years, and I'm willing to have that conversation when you're ready. But I need you to hear me right now. I was not invited to your anniversary party. That happened. And I need you to know that it happened." She cried. I stayed calm. I said I loved her. I also said I was done sending monthly contributions until we'd had that bigger conversation, and that I hoped she and Dad were doing well, and that I had to get back to something. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a minute. Then I opened my laptop and transferred 6 months' worth of what I'd been sending to my family into a high-yield savings account I'd opened for the Japan trip. I decided I was going to keep doing that. Every month. Until something actually changed. My sister called 4 days later. She started with, "I just want to say," and I already knew the sentence wasn't going to end with an apology. It ended with, "that you really hurt Mom and Dad by making it seem like something bad happened, when really you just couldn't make it." I couldn't make it, I repeated. Right. I couldn't make it because you told me I wasn't invited. Silence. You know, I said, the hard part isn't even the party. The hard part is that you looked at someone who has been quietly filling the gaps in this family for 6 years and decided she wasn't worth a seat at the table. And then when she went and found her own table, you called it selfish. She didn't respond to that directly. She said things were complicated. She said his parents had certain expectations. She said I always made everything about money. I make it about money, I said, because for 6 years, money has been the primary way I've been involved in this family. That was the last conversation we've had. I am not going to tell you that I'm fine with all of this. I'm not. There are nights where I still feel the shape of it, the way it sits differently than regular grief, because this isn't loss exactly, it's more like recognition. Like finally seeing something clearly that was always there. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, it does. But here's what I can tell you. I used to feel like my independence was a problem. Like the fact that I'd built something stable for myself was somehow a source of obligation rather than pride. I felt guilty for having savings. I felt guilty for wanting to travel. I felt guilty every time I spent money on myself, because there was always a need somewhere in my family that I could have put it toward instead. I don't feel that way anymore. I have the lopsided pottery bowl from Kyoto on my kitchen counter. It holds my keys and a hair tie and a fortune from a fortune cookie I got at the airport. The fortune says, the best investment you can make is in yourself. I know that's generic. I know they print that on 10,000 fortune cookies. I don't care. It's sitting in a bowl I made with my own hands in a city I went to because I finally stopped asking for permission. My parents' mortgage is no longer something I think about at night. My sister's grocery budget is not my problem. I still love my family in the complicated way you can love people who have disappointed you, in the way you love something that used to be something else. But I am not their table, and I am not their wallet. I found my own table. It has good lighting and enough room, and no one at it is going to tell me I'm not family enough to sit down.